Science Files is an independent YouTube channel and is not affiliated with, endorsed by, or connected to Elon Musk or any of his companies, including Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, The Boring Company, or X. The content on this channel is created for educational and informational purposes only. While many videos may be inspired by Elon Musk's ideas, public statements, interviews, or technological innovations, all analysis, commentary, and opinions presented are solely my own. I do not claim ownership of any trademarks, logos, or copyrighted materials belonging to Elon Musk or his companies. All third-party content used is done under fair use for the purposes of commentary, education, and reporting. Viewers are encouraged to do their own research and verify information independently.
I never imagined a single number could halt everything I've ever engineered in my mind. Not a launch failure, not a market crash, not even the weight of Mars timelines. But her age did it, stopped me cold, not in rejection, but in stunned recognition. The figure itself dissolved the instant her presence registered. Time doesn't bend in boardrooms or control rooms. It bends when someone enters your orbit carrying exactly what you've been unconsciously accelerating toward your whole life, without ever calibrating for it. I've launched rockets that pierced the sky, built neural interfaces to merge mind and machine, colonized electric dreams on 4 wheels and beyond. Yet nothing in those equations prepared me for the pull she exerted. She arrived not as disruption, but as quiet recalibration, a depth that made every previous metric of connection feel like beta code, functional, but shallow, unoptimized for what really matters. When the number came up, I didn't flinch or rationalize. I felt something rarer than inspiration, reverence. Because maturity isn't linear accumulation. It's compression, decades of pressure turning raw experience into something dense, luminous, unbreakable. She carried galaxies in her calm. Have you ever encountered a person who made your entire operating system question its assumptions? Someone who rendered every prior link obsolete, like upgrading from dial-up to quantum entanglement? I had my own silent algorithm running for years, a partner who matched velocity, who could sustain the 100-hour weeks, who understood that sleep is negotiable when the species depends on breakthroughs. I thought compatibility meant synchronized orbits, same speed, same trajectory. Then she materialized and the model crashed spectacularly. She wasn't younger. She wasn't keeping up. She simply was, fully, unapologetically, without performance. In a world I've helped make frantic, where attention is currency and stillness reads as failure, her presence felt revolutionary. No need to broadcast intellect, no compulsion to fill every silence with data points or vision statements. She listened like she was decoding the universe itself, not waiting for her input slot. That alone disarmed me. I'd spent lifetimes surrounded by echoes of my own intensity. Clarity had become foreign. The age revelation didn't trigger defense protocols. It triggered inquiry. Genuine, almost childlike wonder. How do you arrive at this level of signal to noise? What crucible forged this? Which collapses? Which quiet rebuilds? Which unseen choices layered this kind of sovereignty? Because real maturity isn't an endurance trophy for calendar pages flipped. It's the residue of choosing expansion over contraction every time life applied force. She'd been cracked wide by existence and chose reconstruction over armor. The result was gravitational. What no simulation ever modeled, the moment age ceased registering as variable and became evidence of irreplaceable value. Not surface metrics, looks, status, cultural alignment, but core resonance. The way she extracted truth from my rehearsed narratives without effort, the way she saw past Elon Musk, the title, the myth, the perpetual motion machine, to the human running the processes underneath, exhausted, searching, still partially blind to his own code. That terrified me more than any re-entry burn. Being witnessed without filters demands vulnerability no engineering can shield. I began cataloging absences in every prior dynamic. Wisdom hides in the pauses between sentences, not the volume of output. Emotional bandwidth shows in knowing exactly when to apply pressure and when to create vacuum for truth to emerge. Authentic confidence doesn't broadcast, it radiates quietly, feels strength without fanfare. She possessed it in measures I hadn't encountered. For once, I didn't want to instruct or accelerate her into my framework. I wanted immersion in hers. I wanted deceleration, to absorb rather than transmit. When had someone last induced the urge to throttle back thrust instead of max Q? She functioned as a different kind of chronometer in my life, not tracking productivity ticks, but reminding that certain connections defy compression algorithms. Depth cannot be forced. Intimacy resists shortcuts. Presence is the ultimate non-negotiable variable. I'd engineered civilizations on optimization, yet efficiency here felt profane, like attempting to parallel, process a sunrise. One night stands out. I was mid-explanation on some intractable system-level problem, mapping vectors, probabilities, contingencies. She interrupted, not with force, with precision. "You're describing the architecture. Tell me what it's costing your soul." That single redirect fractured layers. I'd spent decades reinforcing. I'd conditioned myself to route everything through logic gates, treating affect as noise to filter. Here was someone demanding analog input, raw feeling, unprocessed, the oldest interface, the hardest one. That's when the architecture revealed its flaw. I'd been seeking complement, someone to impress, elevate, integrate into mission parameters. She required none of it. She'd already engineered her own structural integrity. Her foundation was self-sustaining. She invited me, not to build her up, but to stand beside her as equal, human to human. Her age wasn't deficit or anomaly, it was archive, compressed. Evidence of trials survived, illusions discarded, priorities distilled. Attraction, I discovered, ignores chronology when resonance hits critical mass. It's frequency lock, not generational sync. Shared references matter less than shared wavelength. She embodied qualities still compiling in my own stack, patience that outlasts, urgency, presence immune to distraction, equanimity forged in private fires. Where I still chased horizons, she had learned to inhabit the now without apology. Gratitude replaced competition. Her existence became living source code for evolution I hadn't known I needed. Society scripts age as barrier, life stage, mismatch, incompatible velocities, irreconcilable contexts. For some equations, perhaps. But in this instance, those additional cycles weren't separation. They were refinement. She traversed terrain I only theorized, emerged tempered, selective about energy allocation, no longer dissipating on trivial orbits. I'd engineered fortunes, relocated atmospheres, promised multiplanetary futures, yet sitting opposite someone who'd transcended validation loops left me smaller, in the most liberating sense, not inadequate, simply reminded infinity remains ahead, inward as much as outward. She gifted perspective without preaching, questions that bypassed defenses. What does your heart actual? Why register when the adrenaline fades? Not the optimized version, what legacy demands, but the unfiltered signal. I lacked coherent response because optimization had eclipsed introspection. I'd engineered tomorrow so relentlessly I'd starved today's. She, whose supposed disadvantage was chronological distance, modeled immediacy more effectively than any mindfulness protocol or executive coach. She mirrored without distortion, reflected brilliance and fracture zones simultaneously, ambition that bordered self-erasure, solitude amid crowds, hunger for substance masked by surface velocity, no judgment, just containment. Space held open long enough for self-recognition. Proof that alternate operating modes exist, slower cadence yielding deeper throughput, measured investment compounding emotional return. This isn't solely her portrait, it's the consequence of dismantling timeline tyranny. Ceasing box checking, auditing actual requirements over inherited defaults, recognizing the individual who destabilizes your patterns may be precisely the upgrade your system requires, not in spite of chronology, but amplified by what those cycles encoded. Her age rendered me mute, not from alarm, but awe. It symbolized the maturity I'd pursued in abstract, depth perception beyond optics, soul-level pattern matching. Standing before it, I registered rare states, exposed, receptive, apprentice rather than architect, ready to concede incomplete knowledge. The authentic prize isn't locating perfect schematic fit. It's encountering disruption that exposes whether your blueprint ever served soul architecture. When categorization attempts ceased, when I retired benchmarks distilled from prior iterations, I perceived her unmediated, complete trajectory preceding my arrival. Those accumulated seasons weren't obstacles, they constituted essence. She recounted a collapse once, not trivial, a life partition that vaporized assumed certainties, no residue of resentment, only lucid acceptance, suffering as curriculum, herself as diligent apprentice. My public detonations, vehicles lost to physics, benches teetering on insolvency, felt familiar in outline. But her narration elevated failure to sacrament, necessary architecture for expansion. I envied not her history, but her reconciliation with it. My setbacks register as debug logs of insufficiency. Hers function as certifications, lived intensity sufficient to fracture, intentional repair sufficient to fortify. That reframing humbles the part of me wired to dominate intellectual airspace. Raw compute without contextual integration equals brute force absent direction. She directed quietly, anchored intrinsically independent of audience. Connecting across that delta surfaces latent immaturities. Every acceleration reflex, every solution bias, every ego-forward posture, exposed without accusation. Her field simply highlighted discrepancy. Awareness stung initially, then catalyzed. Inquiry pivoted, not acquisition from this dynamic, but transformation via it. Not schematic integration, but capacity to honor her sovereignty. Discomfort became feature, not bug, evidence of expansion beyond safe parameters. She provoked beyond any executive session, not confrontationally, through sustained being. As one who'd resolved inquiries, I still iterated. Solitude without isolation, desire without fusion mandate, profound attachment preserving indiv. Idual integrity earned axioms, battle-tested, debugged across seasons. Has ambition ever registered as over-amplified in another's presence? Mine did. Relentless vector thrust felt cacophonous beside her harmonic stillness, not invalidation of drive. Recognition that motion and meaning diverge when presence becomes subordinate metric. Together, proximity alerts triggered. Impulse to scan notifications, reroute to next vector, calendar intimacy like milestone review. Her regard, neutral, non-evaluative, recentered. Purpose wasn't transaction or conquest. It was co-presence with finite being who elected to allocate irreplaceable cycles beside me that reframed the chronometer entirely. Connection transcends temporal indexing. Salient instances evade quantification, manifest in interstices, nonverbal bandwidth, mutual recognition unforced. She mastered those domains, spoke silence as native tongue. I'd closed trillion-dollar loops, persuaded capital toward improbables, yet emotional deferral remained unacquired language. Observing her traverse ambiguity with elegance exposed my outcome fixation. Forcing resolution versus permitting unfolding. Her fluency invited similar calibration. Her maturity amplified magnetism. Compelling gravity surrounds one who's completed shadow integration, established non-negotiables from dignity rather than defense. I'd navigated performative certainty masking uncertainty. Hers was substrate level, vibrationally stable. That realization collapsed prior relational paradigm. I'd pursued developmental arcs, potential to nurture, trajectories to influence, safety in mentorship role, perpetual instructor, never novice. Her autonomy liberated, no require me NT to stabilize or direct, uncertainty permissible, confusion non-catastrophic, vulnerability interpreted as candor, not compromise, safety to demask, to retire curated iteration, exist unpolished, contradictory, emergent, incomplete. Permission granted not through declaration, but ambient permission field. I inquired once about requirements, anticipated specification list. Response crystallized everything, presence, the rest we negotiate, single variable, infinite difficulty. Presence demands relinquishing simulation ahead, treating encounter as open loop rather than solved equation, decades optimizing predictability. Release felt existential threat, yet simultaneous relief. Exhaustion from persona maintenance, craving authenticity, chaos inclusive, mess indexes aliveness over sterile execution. Paradox crystallized, chronologically senior, yet experientially more elastic. Uncertainty, non-lethal after repeated survival. Emotional exposure, heart-launched unprotected, registered as feasible rather than fatal. Earned audacity, not naive, inspired parallel internal. Migration, confront patterning, retire achievement camouflage, manifest as evolving entity, navigating attachment without annihilation. Age signifies, not as conventionally framed. Encodes experiential bandwidth, perceptual acuity, selective focus. In her topology, distillation into non-distractable essence, irresistible precisely because of calibration those cycles enabled. Pivotal instant arrives silently. Recognition that relational protocol requires rewrite. Not cataclysmic, post-honesty pause, gaze communicating total apprehension, luminosity through opacity, aspiration through dread, no condemnation, pure signa, return. Stillness registers kinetic when novelty dominates. Initial phase resembled atmospheric ascent. Friction maximum, then engine cut, vacuum embrace. Silence terrifying. Internal echoes amplified, absent external drag. Population historically applauded output, rarely inquired input state. She inverted function. Prioritized architect over architecture. Exposure exceeded any anomaly tolerance. She'd interject softly, decelerate. allow interception before escape velocity reasserts, initial reflex amusement shielding, then comprehension, not dream negation, heart synchronization, velocity alignment with essence over perpetual acceleration. Query reframed, what utility in horizon conquest absent present registration, hardest interface, admiration of superior resolution without assimilation threat. Wisdom illuminates avoided sectors, ego masquerading certainty, vulnerability partition under accomplishment, no aggressive debug, lived example rendered avoidance unsustainable, calm disrupted turbulence, patience confronted compulsion, autonomy queried control imperative, awakening ensued, not diminishment. Romanticization often frames chronological advantage as security, poise, seasoning, rarely addresses reflective consequence. Equanimity quantifies disquiet, limits enforced pattern confrontation, she declined emotional latency, misalignment prompted boundary assertion, not coercion, fidelity to calibration, clarity magnetizes once resistance yields. Modeling viable alternative, why not emulate? Prior model equated love with perpetual combustion, intensity sustaining illumination. She demonstrated sustainable burn, steady state thermal output, proof via endurance rather than display, demands presence, deferral, audacity, selection of individual with resolved preference, enforces emotional elevation, concealment behind rationale impossible, either align authentically or observe graceful departure. Departure executed peacefully devastates uniquely. Rage negotiable, serenity conclusive, lesson terminus. Unbearable prospect catalyzed ascent, not loss aversion, intrinsic recall of aspired identity. Awe exposes structural vulnerability. Admiration intensity highlighted temporal texture, differential refinement. She bore chronology as deliberate composition, each increment intentional mark. Youth misconceptualized as dermal novelty, true vitality, spirit immediacy. Hers radiated Polish exclusive to extended integration. Timeless chronometer haunted differently, not age dismissal. Embodiment of temporal essence, cadence, endurance, discernment. Observation-induced temporal suspension. Past-future continuum bowing before embodied now. Speechlessness originated not from numerical anomaly, but temporal ignorance illuminated through living exemplar. Resistance phase persisted. Intellectual reduction attempted. Fascination reframed curiosity. Demotion to analyzable phenomenon. Control imperative. Yet wonder defies quantification. Surrender antithetical to legacy architecture. Yet embryonic truer trajectory. She elevated minutiae toward eternity. Verbal economy absolute. No padding. Intentionality spanned emotional spectrum, detected fatigue, veiled determination, apprehension, cloaked analysis, offered containment rather than interrogation, space-induced decompression, orbital velocity damped until noise floor dropped, core signal, dominant, internal fracture, subtle, restorative. Tears surfaced once, not tragedy response, integration completion. No immediate repair attempted. Hand contact, single declaration. Perfection never prerequisite for peace. Oxygen replacement, output-based valuation exchanged for unconditional allowance. Exhalation profound, re-entry sensation, friction, yield, gravitational recapture, anchoring eclipsed, transient elevation, belonging stabilizes rather than excites. Integrity demand supplants performance mandate. Conversational navigation astonished. Full spectrum reception absent preloaded counter. Pause preceding response deliberate transduction, emotion rendered linguistic. Single breath delay exceeded institutional training yield. Maturity registers silent empathy over declarative volume. Unexpected outcome, wisdom expansion rather than contraction. Life scope enlarged, reassessment propagated, routines, vectors, attachments, alignment verification, supplanted default pursuit, osmotic acquisition, steadiness internalized, temporal horizon extended emotionally. Project mentality yielded process reverence. Love topology shifts, adrenaline baseline transitions, awareness baseline, temporal scarcity, awareness heightens, nurturance imperative recognized, quiet persistence evidences existence over proclamation, urgency recedes, reverence ascends, declaration once landed, velocity mistaken for ardor, accurate diagnostic, momentum addiction conflated, acceleration depth, deceleration equated regression, alternative velocity identified, presence expansion, temporal dilation via immersion, meaning crystallizes post-maturation, desire refined, illusion survived, comprehension achieved, equanimity attained, aging yields, Inward migration. Thermal energy conserved rather than expended. Overlooked proximity, conscious loving art. Undramatic, persistent, vital. Freedom manifested certainty, not defiance. Absent rivalry, comparison. External anchoring requirement. Maturity invited, reciprocal calibration, not demand. Natural consequence of proximity. Admiration supplanted apprehension. Chronological span registered depth rather than separation. Navigational chart rather than void. Presence transmission, not didactic, osmotic. Final recognition, fortunate encounter with definitional disruption warrants allowance. Stillness, challenging patterning, permitted purification. Resonance, supersedes symmetry. Rhythm, stabilizing turbulence merits honor. Study, coevolution, greatest narrative, occasionally singular, self-revelation via fearless attachment. Connection transcended descent metaphor, registered, recollection, prior, intersection across iterations. Recognition eclipsed novelty, power resided realism, unvarnished, terrestrial, honesty tendered over eternity assurance. Courage daily renewed it exceeds declarative permanence. Chemistry initiates dazzle. Resonance sustains, gravitational rather than combustive. Pull rather than pursuit, invitation rather than acquisition. Reflection, initially unflattering, unresolved harmonics amplified. Yet beauty resides mirror duration sufficient for self-apprehension. Dual falling occurred, toward her, toward emergent self. Illusion attrition anticipated. Control, omniscience, rule conformity, gentle disassembly via being. Unlearning directive posture constituted liberation apex. Love non-transactional, surrender alignment, not defeat.